right, so good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. What I want to go over today is pretty much a big overview of some of the different intellectual developments of the late 19th century. I'm going to spend some time in class talking about more of the cultural developments, gender roles, and those parts of it. But what I really want to do with the time I have with you today is to run through just theories, different philosophers, different scientists at this time, and discuss how they're influential in the 19th century and today. They really do shape a modern view and a modern attitude. Of course, when we use the word modern, we're talking about since the Renaissance, but this new age of ideas and very much our society and how we live in it today, I think, is very much shaped by it. All right, so the first philosophy I want to be starting us off with is one called positivism. Now, positivism is originally coming from Auguste Comte, and it's really the prevailing philosophy post-Romanticism. It's a response to Romanticism, which was a response to Enlightenment. So there's a lot of trends that are following through from the Enlightenment, from the scientific revolution. This is sort of the 19th century version of the Enlightenment ideas, and it really fits well with. It's not the Enlightenment though, so please take that back. But it really fits well with the Industrial Revolution and the experience of the time. So positivism, Auguste Comte, he lived from 1798 to 1857, and he wrote a book called A General View of Positivism. And the goal of knowing, according to Comte, is to describe a phenomenon, not to question its existence. Sort of, he accepts existence as a state, that things are here. Don't question that part, but to be able to describe what you can see, taking a very scientific approach. So positivism itself is the belief that science is going to help us understand nature, so that way we can possibly take on some kind of action. It's a philosophical system that really holds that every rationally justifiable assertion can be scientifically verified or is capable of logical or mathematical proof, and that therefore rejects metaphysics and theism, meaning it's rejecting those things we cannot disprove, and we're going to maintain those things. Now, this theory is that there's laws that are to be understood as social rules, that these laws are valid because they are enacted by authority or they derive logically from existing decisions, and they're moral considerations. So, for example, a rule might be unjust, and just because of that, it should not limit the scope or operation of the law. It's pretty much, I like to think of positivism in the mindset of behaviorists in the 20th century psychology. Okay, so in the world of psychology, there was a guy, B.F. Skinner, who really said that we only need to be focusing on what can be observed and what can be measured, making everything into a science. That's positivism. Skinner, what he did, he's the one who was looking at positive and negative reinforcements and how you can shape behavior that way and understand behavior that way. So he really wanted to make something into a science, and that's what Comte is sort of building off of. Charles Darwin is very famous, as we know, for writing The Origin of Species in 1859. That year, 1859, is a significant year for European history. What he's discussing there really upsets church teachings, and the church has no way to respond to him. He's condemned by the bishops of Oxford, and yet his writings are still spread, they're still known. He's discussing in his books the struggle for existence, survival of the fittest, and is really discussing the idea that our species has evolved from others, that we're all living organisms are connected together in some great web. What this is going to really lead to is the discoveries of Gregor Mendel, which becomes the basis for modern genetics, And Darwin's theory sort of leaves him and then becomes sort of out of his control into social Darwinism, which really emphasizes the benefits of imperialism and the belief of a racial superiority. Now, he said that one race is more evolved than another. That is within his language. He uses race. But when his use of race, he's referring to species. He's referring to different animals. And unfortunately, a lot of his beliefs and writings get skewed as an excuse for why Europeans can take over and should be able to take over the rest of the world. Also an explanation for why some are wealthy and some are poor. We're in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, and a really easy explanation for why there's so much poverty in those streets, those industrialists, is that, oh, well, we're just more evolved. We're more equipped to manage society, sort of self-made man, without really recognizing these things. As a result of Charles Darwin's writings, we see increased really scientific racism and eugenics. If you were watching me, I'd be putting those things in quotes, right? That eugenics becomes this policy of breeding for some kind of ideal race in some way. Freud. Yeah, I'm sorry, we're just going to go through all these. So Sigmund Freud, he's a Viennese physician, and he's going to be the founder of psychoanalysis. In his studies, he came to believe that certain forms of emotional problems were traceable to earlier forgotten episodes. He's going to be using free association and recall. In his book, The Interpretation of Dreams, he really says that dreams are the key to understanding our unconscious, and our unconscious is really where our truth lies. What Freud puts to question is our conscious thoughts and our actual awareness, that we can't trust our own thoughts, that all of our actual thoughts are shaped by this unconscious layer below us. And we have these uncontrollable desires that are mainly based in sex, and that really also challenges a lot of the prevailing Victorian attitudes and mores at the time. So Freud really does start to put to question what we know and what we rely. Now, much of Freud's writings have been debunked, but his beliefs, his language are a Freudian slip. All his references are really important for understanding culture and understanding literature from about 1910 onward. So his ideas really do play an important role. By the late 1890s, we start to see the emergence of the new physics. All right, scientists start to study things like thermodynamics, electromagnetism, theories about atoms and waves, atomic theory. This is the time when Albert Einstein is writing about his theory of relativity, and it's when radioactivity is being discovered. Pierre and Marie Curie are discovering radioactive elements in radium and polonium in 1898. We have advances in cell theory with Louis Pasteur and pasteurization. They developed a vaccine for rabies. And we're entering into this atomic age as well, understanding that atoms are not simple little things, but quite complex. This is when we have scientists like Max Planck saying that energy is emitted from atoms, or Niels Bohr, the idea that atoms have a nucleus, the possibility that there's something even smaller than that. This is an age where science becomes beyond what we can see. And it starts to put to question everything that we know. So if you go from the beginning of this age of positivism, the idea that we're going to only measure what we can know and express, and now we're starting to be able to scientifically prove things that we can't fully observe or prove, but through calculation we can expect. And then Freud's questioning of our conscious thought, knowledge and truth by the end of the 19th century really starts to be put to task in different ways. And with that idea, we have a guy named Nietzsche coming into the world. So there's a video, I'll put it in with this link. There's a great video that sort of pieces out the ideas of Nietzsche. But he writes in 1886 a book called Beyond Good and Evil. He was a German philosopher who came up with the concept of elitism. That's his theory, elitism. What he says is to really own up to envy and be sort of proud of it. Be proud of envy in some way. He says that the church has sort of poisoned our whole philosophy, our whole mindset to have this slave mentality. So he actually announces, he writes in one of his books, Dieu est mort, God is dead. And so in that, he's saying, the church taught us envy is bad, but we should just face our desires and pursue those goals, right? So what envy really is just desire, and we should go after that. That religion really limits our envy, and Christianity sort of gives us a herd mentality, that those things that make us find our potential are then negative. Those who can't have sex are then purity, and it's promoted. Or there's your inability to get revenge is then forgiveness. This video is great, by the way, so I recommend you watching it. What Nietzsche then proposes instead of these moral constructions that are developed by a church is instead a Superman, that this new aristocracy, that you should pursue success. It's okay to glorify and revel in your glories and what you've acquired. And this new aristocracy would actually be above petty materialism and nationalism, and instead rule for the masses and in the interest of the masses. And Nietzsche's theories are attractive, but they can also be dangerous. So we'll talk more about, we'll unpack Nietzsche a bit more. Watch the video, he's interesting guy. Along with Nietzsche, we have this strong desire to be facing reality. Look at reality and then push even further beyond that. Emile Zola is a writer. He is also a major public advocate. We're going to talk about the Dreyfus Affair in class, and he is a major writer then. He's a naturalist writer who's really influenced by Darwin. Now, naturalism is coming out of the realism movement, which we'll look at in terms of art later. But naturalism actually goes beyond just portraying what is real, but using it for a cause to highlight extreme. So it's, as Emile Zola's quote here says, "I'm a little concerned with beauty or perfection. I don't care for the great centuries. All I care about is life, struggle, and intensity." What he's really pushing for is to point out these problems and these mistakes. So he seeks to really arrive at laws of human development, like a biologist who collects data or makes laws, and he sort of develops this natural history. And naturalism and real development of mankind is reflected in his writings, where he's going to really portray the absolute abysmal state of the working man in the 19th century. Along with these writers and thinkers, we also have a new art movement, which first starts with Impressionism. The Impressionist movement is a name invented by the critics of Claude Monet's, this painting right here, Claude Monet's painting Impression Sunrise. And Monet is sort of considered to be this father of this movement. What Impressionism does is it really uses light, and it's all about playing with where light lays rather than really portraying true reality. So it uses both light and shadow and component colors to have the viewer sort of make an image out of that. Sort of reassemble the image for their own selves. It's an abandon of real traditional convention of symmetry and line in favor of an arrangement that sort of puts the principal figure off to a side, even sometimes cut off. It's chaotic, it's movement, it's not clear, and it's very much up to the viewer to make the decision as to what they're actually looking at. And depending on your position and your angle, you're going to see something different. And so once again, it's a very unique perspective, and it's a bit unknown, right? What is the artist actually going after? Impressionism is going to also lead to a response called post-impressionism, which was really founded by Paul Cézanne. Cézanne sort of looked at impressionism as a student of impressionism. You can definitely see the connection here in his work. But in post-impressionism, he reintroduces the line. He thought impressionism was just a bit too obsessed with light, and it missed geometric qualities that you actually do find in nature. So there ends up being this counterbalance, and post-impressionism leads us to modern art that we see today. So this starts to be the pathway there. You might be able to recognize it's a bit, I always look at this painting and think it's a bit Edward Hopper of sorts. Religion in the 19th century this is the last point I'd like to talk about, is really where, is really losing any real presence in the popular mindset. Religion is something that still is important in the home life, and it certainly will form individuals' perspectives, views still will be valid, but as a ruling force to sort of create judgment or cause mass opinion of one way towards another, it's really lost that power. A lot of that deals with the Italian unification and the power of the Pope and how it was challenged, but it's also all of these new movements and these new ideas. Pope Pius IX is the Pope who was originally fairly liberal. And he was open to some of these new ideas, and then will turn conservative after Mazzini leads that revolution in Rome. And through his actions of the Italian unification, he actually will publish, as this image is showing you, the Mad Bull, or the Syllabus of Errors. This is his encyclical that really sort of starts to target all these liberal ideas and points out how they're dangerous and calls for true Catholics to oppose them. Statements in the encyclical condemned as false the following things. So he said these things are false. He called human reason, without any reference whatsoever to God, as the soul is the sole arbiter of truth and falsehood and of good and evil, as false, right? So reason is false. That in present day it is no longer expedient that the Catholic religion should be held as the only religion of the state, to the exclusion of all other forms of religion. So he's calling religious toleration as a bad idea. He also calls out Protestantism, and he says that, Protestantism is nothing more than another form of the same true Christian religion, in which form it's given to please God equally as in the Catholic Church. He says, no, Protestantism is not okay. We can't keep that as separate. They need to join the fold again. He pretty much goes through each of these things, and he also then said, he also disagreed with the idea that the church ought to be separated from the state and the state from the church. He says, no, we should not be separate. We should be one, and the Catholic voice should be the one that's dominant. Pope Pius IX will also declare in 1870 papal infallibility. And he will say that the Pope can claim at times to be infallible, to not be any more wrong. And his first infallible statement is to create the Immaculate Conception, which is a new holy day of obligation for Catholics that he imposes just in the 1870s. Pope Leo XIII, just as an aside though, papal infallibility doesn't mean that every single time a pope says something he's infallible. He'll purposely say this is an infallible statement. But it's generally rejected except by Catholics throughout all of Europe. And the focus starts to turn, particularly with Pope Leo XIII, his successor, who's a bit more liberal. He tries to show some kind of diplomacy. And he's going to try and make agreements with places like Germany to allow for the Catholic Church to balance in German areas. He's a bit more sympathetic to scientific progress. He recognizes the need for the Roman Catholic Church to be open to some of these progresses, but his greatest concern is to spread the Catholic message throughout the world. So this is where I'll stop for today. Please watch the video on Nietzsche, and have a great day. Take care.